some level at least. Okay, thanks.
Thanks. I'm just struggling a lot with doing God's way, and I'm just wondering, why do some of us find it so hard? I'm just wondering about those qualities of desire for truth and humility, whether that's actually part of the personality of some people's souls, and that's why that they can do God's path, because you've mentioned with your soul.
So can I put to you a proposition? So what you're telling me is that God designed a path, which is the only pathway to God, and then God designed some souls that would find the path as hard as possible.
I feel like that He's designed some souls that can do it.
Yeah.
And mine is one that can't, unfortunately, and that, yeah.
And that is just a false belief. It is an untruth.
So is it just my fear is just, because I'd reflect on what's different about me than people that are doing God's way. Is it just my fear and just that my parents have so much resistance?
It's because you have resistance.
From my parents?
It doesn't matter where it's from, does it?
I guess not. I'm just probably trying to compare.
And why would you be trying to understand it? Because you don't want to feel it. Right, see what happens is, this is what's happening for many of us, is for some reason we believe that God, in infinite love and wisdom, which we intellectually grasp, but we don't yet feel, we intellectually grasp that God has this infinite love and wisdom, so therefore God created a system and created our souls in this scope of everlasting and incredible infinite love and wisdom. And then we said that then God created a whole heap of souls which would find it as hard as possible, and God did that for what reason? To torment those particular souls, I gather. Is that the reason? Which is perhaps what our parents might have done, but it's certainly not what God would have done. So God didn't create this to be harder for Kate than it is for Mary. Never. God never created it that way. God created it consistent right across the board. It's the same way that all of us, if we wish to be at one with God, need to embrace. We need to embrace this particular path. I'm saying to you that if there is resistance to the path and love is not flowing into your soul, that it is completely and utterly under your own control. Now, I know that's a fairly hard truth for some of us to accept, but it is the truth that if God's love is not flowing into the soul, the only thing that can prevent it is me. I am the only impediment to the process. And the only thing that would cause me to have impediment to the process is my humility. So if I'm finding that things are not progressing for me, I need to examine my humility. And remember, humility is often prevented by fear. It's your fear that stops you from being completely humble. In other words, your fear prevents you from having a passionate longing and desire to feel all beliefs and emotions, whether they are painful or pleasurable. So work on your fear. Stop using fear as an excuse to justify false belief systems that then cause you to justify why you can't do it. Do you understand? So you're using your fear of feeling everything to justify this untruth that you've created, that God has created some souls so it's harder for them than other souls. This is an untruth, and your fear creates it, and it's your fear of your real feelings that you don't want to surrender to that creates that feeling.
So it's just another of my ingenious ways of avoiding my feelings.
Yes, Kate, that tells me you are a very clever woman. Huh?
What do you mean?
Because you've come up with a very clever way of avoiding some emotion.
But it's not very clever, really, is it?
That's the problem. It's intellectually might seem clever to us because it prevents pain for a shortened period of time, but it doesn't stop the pain of our entire life, and it creates its own negative creations as a result of the pain that exists. So while it may appear to be the best course of action to our mind to nurse ourselves through a period of hardship, it's certainly not the best course of action for our soul. This is where our mind is pretty hopeless, really, when it comes to understanding matters of the heart. Yep. And it's our fear that dominates most of our thinking, and unfortunately dominates most of our untrue belief systems that we hold on to because we don't want to feel. It's amazing what we do to not feel. I don't know about you, but I've been actually blown away sometimes of the extent I will go to not feel. And I'm a pretty humble person. You haven't had to tell me when I've been unloving to you. Right? And yet I often enter this state, even with some of my emotions recently, particularly some of my emotions recently, where I'm not in the state of humility because I'm so afraid to deal with some of the emotions. I'm so afraid to feel them. We need to stop creating alternate belief systems in order to not feel. We're experts at it. And our parents taught us to be experts at it, and their parents taught them to be experts at it, and it goes back for generations. But that doesn't justify the condition. Does that answer your question though, Kate? Because there's still a feeling in you that God must have created you differently, isn't there?
I can understand what you're saying.
This is what I'm getting at though, Kate.
Yeah, I know.
While you have this feeling in you that God created you differently and has made it harder for you to feel your feelings, while that feeling exists in you, then and doesn't come out, then you're going to carry that belief with you into all of these things that you do. So what you do need to feel is feel that feeling, how much you feel that God made you different to everybody else. Then once you fully feel that feeling, which is an error-based feeling, once you fully feel it, you'll begin to release it, and then you'll realise how much it's tied into your parents and how they treated you and what they believed and so forth. You'll start having all these different truthful realisations that enter you, and when the truth enters you, it will open you up, and now when you long for some love will enter. Does that make sense? If you choose to not feel it and intellectualise it, go, no, I'm just not going to have that belief anymore, which is a state that's only imagined and can never be actually done. If you choose to do that, then you're not even going to ever feel the truth. So you do need to feel the emotion that God created you different, and God purposely did it to traumatise you in some way.
Is that relating to my illness when I was a child?
Yes, and your parents' belief about the illness, and your parents' belief about how they felt that they were being punished or condemned by God for their child having this illness. Remember that many people have grown up with very steadfast, what you would now call religious beliefs, but these are beliefs that have been passed down from generation to generation to generation of people, all about God and God's nature. And a lot of people now believe that God's nature is punishing. You know, people who don't even believe in God think that God's punishing. We have a discussion with an atheist, and like every discussion I've ever had with atheists, they've always gotten back to the fact that God, the way the religions portray them, doesn't exist. And when I agree with them, they get all confused, right? Because they think what I'm doing is saying that the God of the Bible exists, or the God of the Quran exists, and that God doesn't exist. But they've even created their belief system, the atheist belief system, based on the fact that God potentially, according to these people, does exist. And then they argue against the existence of such a thing, and I agree with them totally. There is no such thing. And yet they still carry on the beliefs because of the multi-generational system that has been present for thousands and thousands of years before Christianity even came along, to be frank. This belief that God was a punishing God that we had to appease, and that if we didn't appease this punishing God, that my progeny, my children, would be damaged or hurt or harmed in some way. They used to even, in those times, they used to get the firstborn of their own children, and sacrifice them with a knife to the very God that they were appeasing. Every firstborn generally died in some cultures to that God. That's how strong that belief is in humanity. And that's carried forth into all religions. This idea that God wishes to destroy and punish the people who are wicked, and nobody knows who's really wicked because nobody really knows what's wicked. And so they all were trying to guess. And they also create ideas of what's wicked as a result. And that emotion is in you.
So, because I just remember saying to my mum, how could God? Why did God make this happen to me? I felt I'd done something wrong, but I was only 6 at the time. So, do you think that idea just came to me from my mum's feelings about it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. All of the openness in a child to accept a certain concept comes from the damage, the emotional damage that are in the parents at the time. So yes. And now you feel that you're different to everybody else, that God wants to punish you. And it's very, very hard to connect to a loving God who you don't believe is loving. Yeah. So that
soul level.
That emotion, that if you're humble to that emotion, you'll release that emotion and feel that God's not loving. And then after that, you'll actually realise that God is. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yep. So you can see from these discussions that we've had